let me slow it down just a little bit for the folks that are uninitiated. So let's say that we've got a middle grade novel. I don't know. Let's do A Girl and a Horse. Girl and a horse, but the horse comes from outer space. That's our twist. We've got 8 months' time. How do we go about deciding who the audience is and what our top gets are? Are you asking for the author's input? Let me write down my top 10 and then maybe the editor and start with that? Or how do you go? Where do you go to get your finger on the pulse without giving away all your secrets?
Yeah, and honestly, Rob, that's usually a very collaborative process. And oftentimes it really comes from the author and publisher. Oftentimes they do know best in that respect because they wrote with that audience in mind, or they were inspired by X, Y, and Z authors, filmmakers, artists, other people. And so we can then sort of reverse engineer the marketing, and we can say, okay, well, people who like, the cat that came from outer space are going to like the girl, with the horse who's an alien.
That's a reasonable assumption, I think.
Right. So that's usually very, very collaborative. And it does take time to figure out and to refine. And oftentimes it's evolving as well. Or oftentimes a project will have many different layers to it. And so because publicity and marketing are honestly more time intensive than anything else, I often find, we'll develop a strategy together to go out after different markets in targeted ways at different times so that we're building a really layered and nuanced approach. So maybe 1 week or 1 month will be focused on sort of the genre and the science fiction community, but the next month we will look more at the author's background and the fact that, the girl with the horse, maybe they grew up in a rural area and are a passionate equestrian, and we can leverage that angle with horse media or with human interest media who are writing about people and animals, or horse people are their own thing. There's a whole horse realm of fiction out there, actually. So I shouldn't really get too deep in the weeds on that, or else the YouTube comments are going to come for me. But
Madam, I am a horse fan. You are no horse fan. Oh yeah, sure.
That's right. And I actually am a horse fan. Like, I do ride horses sometimes, but
for this then.
Right. So we might say, and this is important actually. Science fiction is a good or even horror actually. And you mentioned you write horror, which is awesome. I promote a lot of horror. It's one of my favorite genres to work in. But that's a really important point where we talk about that layered target audience. For example, some science fiction or horror is, what I would almost call hard. So it's deeply scientific, or it's super intense and scary and not for the faint of heart. Other science fiction is more like dystopian, accessible, world building, stuff that people who don't have, engineering degrees can follow. I've worked on science fiction novels where it's like you need a PhD in, biochemistry to even understand what's going on. And so with a book like that, it's like your target audience is very narrow, but if you're able to effectively identify them and then tap into them, you're a success. You will be successful. It's when you go general instead of specific that things are going to be more difficult for you.
Okay, so the more specific, the better. And then, so we put together our list, and we've got that 8-month window. It sounds like every month we're doing something a little bit different. How involved does the author need to be? Is the author kicking back and working on that next book, or are they attending all the events that you're booking for them? Are they co-booking? How are you going to work best with an author to get them set up for success?
It's a really good question, and it really depends, again, on the nature of the author, on the nature of our engagement. Are we working with a traditional publisher in tandem with their in-house team? In which case, their in-house team might take the lead on things like organizing events and be looking to us to just support with local media outreach to ensure that news of those events is broadcast to the appropriate channels. Is it an author who's brand new to the world of marketing and needs sort of full court support in that respect, which we would be capable of providing? Is it an author who's comfortable doing events? It's funny because I've worked on projects with authors who are like event pros, like are just amazing in front of an audience, and that is where they shine, and that's where a lot of our marketing emphasis thus goes, and it's successful because of it. And I've worked with other authors who are like, they like writing, they're happy to do some media, but they don't really want to be out there on the road talking to, they're introverts, and they're not that comfortable in front of a big crowd. And those projects can be very successful too. So this all sort of comes back to that upfront assessment of the project and where it's going to work. Rob, something I say now that social media has become such a behemoth and something that many authors believe that they must do. I have to be really good at social media in order to be successful with my book. And my point is often, no, you don't, because if you don't like it, that's going to show. And you're not going to be good at it as a result of that. And nobody likes sort of attending an event where an author is joyless or following someone on Instagram when it's like clear that they're just sort of going through the motions and posting really boring content and, just clearly disengaged. What we have to do, and I think what we really work with our clients to do, is find your sweet spots. Find those things that like make you feel joyful and like you're tapping into the audience that you wrote the books for. I mean, I would think that you as an author, you're like imagining a kid when you're writing Banneker Bones, who's gonna follow along with these adventures and be excited to read them. You know who that is, I'm sure, in your mind. Do you?
Oh, I know his name. Got a photo of him. His mother sent me to him. He's dressed in the Banneker costume.
Wow.
So I know exactly what I was going to expect. Sure. Although I never say no to readers outside of that. But sure, I've got a very specific idea that I'm looking for a child between the ages of 8 and 12. Go a little bit older than that for the kids that like to read down. But I'm very aware that a lot of my audience is going to read up. So sure, I've got some idea of who my audience is in mind. But my audience is always a little bit me. I would love to have someone like you in my corner who not all you do, big part of what you do, your expertise is identifying audiences. So we're trying to identify the audience. I come to you with my, what do we say, girl and a horse, and the horse and the alien. Wonderful. First thing you say is, let's get you hooked up on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. That we don't even need to say that. She expects that. So that makes sense. But then how are we going to target audiences beyond the little girls who like science fiction? How are we going to get more specific than that and drill down to find who we need to come out and support this book?
Right. So first, we need to get that key demographic. Then we can start building out. So I love to hear that you know who your reader is for Banneker Bones, because you're such a savvy author. Like, you could teach classes to authors, and you do with the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. You have these very enlightening conversations.
Oh, I have classes I charge for too. That's a good time.
Oh, do you?
Sure.
That's awesome. So
fiction workshops on a regular basis. I love working with new authors. But we were saying, so how are we going to find this ideal audience to target?
Right. So first and foremost, we have to define, who's that sort of like, I almost think about it like concentric circles, right? Like who's the middle, like the fire at the center of this target demo. Then we can sort of start building out from there into people who are more casually interested in genres or subjects or, connections that the author's background may have. And then, of course, when it comes to that sort of like outer circle of major mainstream pop culture, like we're talking, the Hunger Games and, Twilight and, whatever the kids are reading these days. I am showing my ignorance on my sleeve there. Like all my references are from like 10 years ago.
No, I would get in trouble. I have to say they are reading the books of every author I've had on this podcast. So there we are. That's how I have to answer.
Well, no, I mean, great point. You have some amazing people on this podcast. So, those like that outer circle of just mega star media and visibility, like we're talking the New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, People Magazine, like I've got to be honest, that's partially skill and having built a wonderful product that's already resonating with its audience. That's a really important point I often make with my authors, is that those types of outlets, they don't really like creating news. They like covering news. Like they like covering things that momentum is already happening with, but the momentum already needs to be happening. So that's where like our little sort of our inner circle fire starts. And then we can start building out. And then if you look at that type A, tier 1 media, the most major mainstream stuff you can imagine, that is half hard work, having a great product, having a great publicist, doing all of the right things. The other half of it is luck. Because once you get to that point, there are any great number of projects that could go the distance, and I'm sure and I know that I've read novels, I've seen things where it should be bigger than the biggest pop culture franchises in the world, but it's not. And why is that? It's the same reason why some people win the lottery, but you can't.
While there's a project with virtually no marketing, that word of mouth spreads and lifts it up, and it becomes the world's biggest thing out of nowhere.
Exactly, and it is like lightning striking. You cannot bank on it. So we need to start with that little focused core audience and think about them like a flame that we can then like stoke the fire and build it out further. But if we only have like a measly little like two sticks rubbing together, like a little sparks going on there, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to start to reach those more casual fandoms or audiences. So that's where I would always start.
Okay. Sorry, you lost me a little bit with the metaphor. So what does two people rubbing sticks look like? How do we know if we're there and when we need to build beyond that?
Sorry. I was just sort of trying to say that, like, if your impact with your core target demographic is weak, that's your weak little like spark, almost a flame, like not quite a fire, you're not going to be able to expand that out further. You need to first focus on getting that little core fire really burning bright, really that key demographic of, let's say like 12-year-olds who also, like X, Y, and Z authors, whose moms purchase or dads purchase, these types of products for them. That's your audience. If you're doubling down on that audience and making a real significant impact with them, it's going to be much easier for us to build out to more casual fan bases. But if you haven't even really started to succeed with the people who should be most naturally inclined for you to be successful with, then it's going to be much more difficult.